Okay, calm down. You got limits, man. You got limits, man. Okay, calm down.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining a special edition of the Katie Halper Show. We are coming to you right now. It is Thursday. We usually stream Tuesdays at 7 p.m., but right now it is Thursday, 5:22 p.m. I don't know why I'm providing this, but in case anyone wants to mark this historic moment where we are having on for the first time Professor Mohammad Marandi. Now you know exactly when it is Eastern Standard Time. As people probably know, I was away last week in Vienna at the world's first Jewish anti-Zionist Congress. So we'll have a lot of great stuff to tell you about that later. But because we were away for 2 weeks in a row and because there's such important news, we wanted to do an extra live stream this week. And who better to do it with than someone who I think has been educating so many of us about the realities of Iran and really re-educating people about the realities of Iran and showing the world how you can respond to media that serves as a stenographer for Israel. So before we get started, just please do like the stream. That's a way to help out the show, help get more eyes on the show. We definitely want to be elevating voices like Dr. Marandi's. Also, please give this a thumbs up. Please subscribe to Patreon at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. We have Patreon coming down the pike for you, including some mini interviews I did with Roshan Dadu, who is the BDS coordinator in South Africa. We also have a really cool interview with a woman, Camille Levy, who is from Tunisia. And she talks about the way that Zionism really harmed Arab Jews intentionally as part of their Zionist project. So those are really interesting interviews that you should just definitely check out. Okay, and today on this show we have two parts. First, we are speaking to the wonderful Dr. Marandi, and then we are going to be joined afterwards by the great Mouin Rabbani. So two experts that I'm honored to talk to. Okay, so we're going to start the stream, and Dr. Marandi, probably people already know, is professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. And he's coming on to talk to us about Iran, Israel, resistance, and more. So welcome, Dr. Marandi. Hello.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Katie.
Of course. Thank you so much for joining and taking the time. And I know it's late there. So I just want to start by asking you what it is you think that people should know about the reality right now in Iran, given how much obfuscation there is. What is the atmosphere right now on the ground? Obfuscation, I should say, by Western media. Yeah.
Of course. Yes, well, I think first we have to go over very briefly the last 4.5 decades and how Iran has been demonized, not just in the Western media, but in Arabic media controlled by oil and gas-rich dictatorships. So there's been a lot of hostility towards Iran that has been created as a result of these media narratives. And something that I've experienced myself when I've traveled abroad. People have some very extraordinary and very strange views of Iran, but that's the power of media. That's the power of narratives. And it's not just the media, it's also academia, it's academic journals. You have a host of so-called Iran experts that have never been to Iran, or you have these Iranians who work at institutions in the United States that that hire a particular person who produces a particular narrative. And so the views on Iran are so hostile and negative that if anyone wants to say anything different, they're going to seem bad or they're going to be seen as propagandists. And it's almost impossible to dent that narrative. But I would argue that since 9/11 and the forever wars, this has gradually changed very, very slowly, but I would say that over the past 21 months, there has been a drastic shift in the way in which many people are beginning to see Iran because they see how the narrative on Gaza and Palestine and the Israeli regime is in the mainstream media is so horrific. The questions are now raised about Iran, especially since Iran is alongside Yemen the only country that really supports the Palestinian cause. Right now, the situation in Iran is calm. People are very angry. They see this as a unprovoked war and illegal and illegitimate. And from the very beginning, innocent civilians were targeted. Western media likes to present this as some sort of sudden attack, a very sophisticated operation. But basically, what the Israeli regime did in most cases was that they struck civilian targets. For example, in one apartment block where there were one or two senior officers, they brought down the whole block, killing 65 people, including 20 some kids. It's actually not very far from here. And it's close to a studio that I sometimes go to for interviews with international, where I used to go to. Now, after Corona, that things are becoming like this more often than otherwise. So, and there's nothing very complicated about figuring out where a general lives. His neighbors know that. People around in the neighborhood know that. Sometimes they're on TV, so they're public figures often. But again, I think that the Western media, what it's been trying to do over the last week, especially during the first day, is to glorify this assault in order to sort of whitewash the last 20 some months, the 20 months and 20 and a half months. So, they've been justifying this genocide, this Holocaust for so long. And recently we saw that the mood was changing. And I think that was a result of public pressure and the fact that they recognized that the public turned against Israel. So they used this opportunity to present the Israeli regime
Oops.
as somehow. So uh, Iranians are therefore very angry. They're more united than I've ever seen over the past few decades. But this is going to be a tough war. It's going to last a long period of time. Tehran is not crowded. After the attacks began, the administration, the government, they allowed many people to work at home, just like during Corona. And many people were given holidays. So a lot of people in Tehran have left the city. They're working from outside the city, or they're on vacation. So the streets in Tehran aren't very crowded. And things are quiet. And yeah, there are explosions every now and then. They kill people. But it's a huge city. So sometimes there may be something happening on the west side of Tehran, and people on the east side don't hear it, and vice versa.
So, something that you mentioned is that the people are very united. This happens a lot, I think, when there's attempts at regime change from the outside. You have not only kind of the people who are already rallying around the government, but you even have people who would otherwise perhaps be protesting the government. Can you talk about this phenomenon?
Yeah, sure. First of all, according to all polls in the past, the Islamic Republic of Iran has always had a high degree of legitimacy in the eyes of Iranians. That does not mean that Iranians have been satisfied with the government or the administration. No, in fact, it's the opposite. Iranians have always been deeply unhappy with, especially the economy, with, um, inflation, jobs. These are always at the top of people's concerns, and their views are usually not favorable about the economy. And of course, we've had sanctions, very heavy sanctions for a very long period of time. So Iranian administrations are not working under ordinary circumstances, but in any case, ordinary people are not satisfied. But that does not mean that the unhappy ordinary person say that the state is illegitimate. A strong segment of a strong majority of Iranians view the state as very legitimate. But what we have seen is that during the last week, there has been a new poll that came out. People of all walks of life and from all political backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, they have become much more united than before. And of course, this has a lot to do with the fact that the United States and the Israeli regime, they've carried out an unprovoked war. And they suddenly launched attacks across the country and murdered people and destroyed infrastructure. And they're demanding that Iran give up its sovereignty. And that's not going to happen. Iran is not only not going to give up its sovereignty, it's going to fight to punish the aggressor. So the expectation of ordinary Iranians now is for the armed forces to fight back. And this is something that's come out in the polls. But I think anecdotal evidence, that, at least that I've seen in the people around it, indicate that this is definitely the case.
Yeah. I mean, I know this phenomenon more in like Cuba, for instance, right? Cuba, it's really historically, I mean, Cuba, there are ebbs and flows, obviously, but a lot of people have pointed out that the embargo, it harmed people a lot, of course, but it also forced people to rally together. And Cuba was always able to point to this outside bad guy. So, I mean,
Yeah, and also, I've spent a very brief period of time in Cuba once, and it's quite stunning how the United States strangles this country and makes people suffer, whereas it's obviously no threat to the United States, and it's barely just trying to survive. Yet the United States continues to strangle Cuba as we speak. But on the other hand, it has now removed all sanctions from Al Qaeda and ISIS Syria. Syria controlled by ISIS and Al Qaeda. So Syria controlled by ISIS and Al Qaeda is not a security threat to the United States, but Cuba, which is barely able to survive because of the barbaric sanctions, they are a threat to the United States.
Right.
So when you just look at this example and you just think that, well, Iran is being treated with the same sort of standards.
Right. It's a good endorsement of Iran, right?
Oh yes, I actually think that Iran has done a. I mean, if when I'm sitting among friends, let me be very clear about this. When me and my friends sit together, no one speaks well of the government.
Hmm.
No one says, "Yeah, we've done a great job," or "Look at the metro," or "Look how clean it is." No, that's not how Iranians talk. We say, "Look how garbage this is. Look what a terrible job they're doing there. The metros are not working. The airlines are always late." That is part of our culture, by the way. And I think during my stay in the UK, I felt that the British were someone like the Iranians, and that they were usually looking at the darker side of things, the negative, the empty half of the glass. But since I'm speaking to an audience that does not live in Iran, I feel I have a responsibility to explain the half full part of the glass.
Right.
And that is that Iran, under sanctions, has been able to develop an indigenous industry, something which the Russians have learned a lot from over the last 3 or so years since the war began. The Iranians have made a lot of advances in high-tech industries, on nanotechnology, in stem cell research. Anyone could look it up. Iran is very high up there among the more advanced countries, and in AI and other fields. And you can also see this in the wars, sadly, in a way, because Iran is being forced to use its weapon. But Iran's missiles are going through multiple layers of air defenses that are being led by the Americans, and a host of countries are cooperating together to help the Israelis, but still Iranian missiles are getting through, and so are drones. And that, I think, regardless of the fact that war is war, but it reflects the competence, the ability of the Iranians to be able to be creative and to produce things that the world's so-called superpower or the declining superpower cannot do anything about.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I think there's a lot of tension in how to talk about a government when it's being vilified by so many uh, media outlets, by so many governments. It becomes, I think, a lot harder to be critical for understandable reasons. And I think that what's interesting though is to point out that among the people who are critical, even among the people who may want to change the government, they don't want to be bombed, which again is just like common sense. Uh, so I think that that's something that undermines the regime that this is like a popular supported movement, that if you care about Iranians, you should want to bomb them. I mean, I know I'm overstating it because it's so ridiculous, but we see this with Gaza also. People talk about, oh, Hamas is so terrible to LGBTQ people, and we're gonna like, let's table whether or not that's true. Somehow they think the solution then is to kill LGBTQ people, to liberate them from their lives. I believe Max Blumenthal mentioned that the other day. He talked about liberating women in Iran from their lives. I mean, where does this kind of thinking come from?
Well, this is not new. You have this concept, for example, in Orientalism that
Right.
goes back centuries,
Of which you are
and
a professor. Reminder to everyone. Yeah.
yeah, well, yeah, whatever. But so saving, so for example, saving brown women from brown men, and that sort of thing. But it's always about liberation, the civilizing mission, the white man's burden,
Right.
and that sort of thing existed in the past. Now it manifests itself in a different way, but that's how human beings are. If they want to abuse others, my understanding is that if they want to abuse others, they have to justify it to themselves first and foremost,
Right.
and in order to be able to live with themselves. So, a person who is stealing another person's land has to convince himself, at least to a degree, that that person didn't deserve that land. Or if someone kills another person, they say, well, he deserved to die.
Right.
Uh, Maybe after killing a few people, they no longer need to convince themselves and they just become murderers. But in any case, I think that to a large degree, in order to legitimize what they do, they have to create these narratives. So, for example, ever since for over 20 months, the Israeli regime has been carrying out some maybe the worst atrocity in certain ways in human history. And that is being in the sense that it's being carried out in front of a live audience day and night for well over a year and a half. You've had bigger crimes in human history. You've had larger numbers of people slaughtered in horrific ways, but you've never seen it being carried out in front of you. And people have never
Right.
seen these major crimes, whether in the liberation movements in Africa, Latin America, Asia, or in World War II or World War One. We don't have much footage of these things, and if there is, people saw that those bits and pieces many years, decades later. But what we're seeing in Gaza is basically are events that happen sometimes literally just a few seconds before or a few minutes before, sometimes a couple of hours before, and it's all online. And despite the fact that we're seeing it day and night, people, they, they're, how should I put it? Western media continue to justify it or try to justify it. So, and Western governments. So Sorry, there because of the echo. Sometimes it's difficult to concentrate.
I'm sorry. Yeah, this is
But
like a reality
no,
TV
that's
show.
fine. Don't worry about it. So,
Well, this
so
is if you've
while
been
we're
able to
watching
concentrate
it,
while talking to Piers Morgan, this is a lot easier than that, right?
yeah.
Having
Well,
to
actually,
suppress your
that's a good
gag reflex.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah, Piers Morgan is a good example that for 20 months they were trying to justify this genocide, and then it was gradually that narrative was collapsing because people across the world were waking up to the reality. And so, if you want to attack Iran, what do? How do you justify a genocidal regime attacking Iran? You have to demonize Iran very uh, heavily. You have to, hit day and night, and that's what they've been doing for the last 10 days or so. Or it's always been there, but when you look at Piers Morgan, it's clear that people like him are paving the way for aggression. They're making Iran look so sinister, so monstrous, and so evil, and such a threat to the world, and how it's just a dystopia that if you bomb it, it's somehow okay.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if that made sense. Sorry, the echo is pretty loud.
Yeah. No, it does make sense. Brad, is there something we can do like while? And apologies, everyone. This is the first time we've done an interview this
It's
way, but
okay.
it's okay. Okay. But also, Brad, maybe is there a way that we can fix it so that while the professor's talking, I'm muted? Will that help? And I wonder if that will help. Is that going to be an issue? Do you think? Will that help?
It's okay. Don't worry about it.
All right.
Sorry about that. We're doing our best, everyone. Some very, very last minute, very creative problem solving here, but the consequence is Dr. Marandi can hear himself speaking, and he's doing an exceptional job at handling that, I must say.
Yeah, we don't. It's not the echo that someone very kindly said the echo is not distracting, but it's distracting to Dr. Marandi because he hears it. But if I go like this,
I just want to make sure I'm making sense. Otherwise, the echo doesn't bother me. I just want people to understand what I'm saying. Otherwise, I may be saying.
Yeah, that would be funny. That would be really funny. At the end of the show, you get a lot of mail. You're like, wow, I never thought you'd be calling for regime change like you did on the Katie Halper show.
I mean,
so
Dr.
If anything
Marandi,
like that happens, it's because of the echo. Yeah.
Dr. Marandi, even with this additional obstacle that you're handling, you are still far more coherent than the vast majority of speakers in the mainstream, I would say.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Understatement, yeah.
Thank you very much.
And so, Katie, I just received the clip that you'd wanted to play. I just need 1 minute for that.
And people have said that the audio is low, and again, that's an issue that has to do with the audio issues we're having. The good thing is, I guess, I'm not gonna. I won't talk as much as I usually do because we have this extraordinary guest. And also, we will if you're not watching this live, when we make clips, we'll fix my audio. But thank you again for your patience. So we're going to, speaking of Piers Morgan, trigger warning to you, doctor, and trigger warning to everyone in the audience. But we are going to show a clip that you'll at least be able to hear, Dr. Marandi, of a recent interaction between you and Piers Morgan. And this is one of the many masterclasses that you provided in how to respond to, stenography media.
Sorry, Katie. I have the clip, but as you could tell, it wasn't playing. So I just need 1 more minute, and we'll try again. And if that doesn't work, we'll just continue on.
Okay, great. Yeah.
All right.
So on a related note, I'll ask you, what are the major talking points you think that the media, Western media, perpetuates that you think need to be debunked?
Do you want to listen to Piers first?
Oh, sure. Is it up? It seems like the Dr.
I heard him for a second.
Oh, you heard him for a second. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think that I solved the issue, and that's why he heard it that time. So just 1 more minute.
Okay, so yes, you were saying.
Here we
Oh,
go.
Talking
okay.
points.
Yeah, here we go. This
So here's
this
one. Okay.
should work now. Or not.
What if I do a screen share?
Why don't you try that?
Okay, let's see. So, all right,
There
let me
is
do
there is no fourth wall
yeah, this
this
is a very,
evening.
yeah. This is like experimental art right now. 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay, let me try this. Okay, now we're gonna do a screen share.
And I'll remove myself to hopefully make that work.
Okay. 1 second. Let me just. Okay, here we go. Then I'll go in and make it full screen. Okay. Before it says before presenting a screen, remove other media streams from the stage, Brad.
Okay, so it appears to me as though we cannot have Dr. Marandi on screen and
That's
share
okay.
something at the same time.
That's
Okay,
okay. You can
that's
show
okay.
it and then explain to me which part
Yeah.
of the interview was.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, just one
Great. Thank you
moment.
so much.
Nope.
Do you want me to try to do the screen
Yeah.
share?
Why don't you try?
Okay, 1 second.
Thank you for your patience, everyone.
And you
Could you hear that?
Dr. Marandi, do you hear that?
Could you hear it, Brad?
Okay, yep, I can hear it.
All
So
right,
you can
great. Okay.
try it. Yeah.
and you advocate the devil.
It sounds like a guy who is trying to dictate to women how they should dress, how they should behave. Do you understand that in the West, we look at that as reprehensible behavior?
No, in the West, you objectify women, you commodify women, and you sexualize women, and you have Epsteins and many Epsteins to
Or
control
we give
your
women the freedom to dress how they wish. Why would you decline them that freedom?
We in Iran, we have women pilots, we have women scientists. My boss at the University of Tehran, the dean of my faculty is a woman. For the 21 years that I've been an academic at the University of Tehran, 17 and a half of those years, the dean of my faculty was one woman or another. Don't misrepresent Iran. It doesn't work anymore, Piers. Your Western empire is on the decline. The whole of the global South is witnessing the crimes that are being carried out by your regimes. And your declining regimes are now despised by your own people. You're crushing people, students who are protesting genocide. You're not even crushing students who are protesting your own government for something that they're doing at home. You're crushing students for protesting genocide in another country. But you can't tolerate that. And your media is controlled by a group of rich people. They control the narrative, and you call that a democracy. Your choice is either Hillary Clinton or Biden or Trump. And then when that decision is made, the whole of Europe, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand fall in line as good soldiers. You don't have democracy.
Wow. So that
So
was.
take your screen off now.
Oh yeah, sorry. Okay.
I know you can't see it, Dr. Marandi, but I couldn't help having the most giant grin on my face while we played that. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to get out of here.
Okay, yeah. And then
Thank
Brad,
you.
we're going to want to
Thank
play
you.
another media video of him on Sky News. That's also in the document. Just a heads up.
All right, I will try
Oh,
that.
I'll do it. I'll do it. Sorry, I forgot. I'll do
Okay.
it. Yeah.
All
Okay,
right.
great.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that is, again, it's a masterclass, I think, in how you respond to Western chauvinists. What do you have any tips for people when they go on shows like Piers Morgan's and they are presented with this pseudo-feminist argument about how we want to liberate women from their hijabs by, I guess, dropping bombs on their heads?
You know, I really am not a big fan of my own debating skills. I'm usually very dissatisfied with myself once I leave the studio or once the program is over. And there are lots of people I think who do a lot better than me. and to speak much more eloquently. But usually, I think what helps is that you have facts. And the facts, when you have facts, it makes the argument much easier. They have to fabricate an argument based upon their imagination or based upon a narrative that has been created for centuries and reinforced in recent years, but founded upon that Orientalism of old. So when I invited Piers Morgan to come to Iran on his show, actually, and I didn't surprise him. I told one of his producers before the show, what if I invite him, what would his response be? And I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was sort of like, go for it. And I invited him, and he rejected it. And then in this last session, of course, he said yes. He was implying that I take him hostage, or I don't know, treat him like a hostage, or put him in prison. It's very insulting, but it doesn't bother me. But the point is that when he rejects visiting Tehran, then he has already lost the argument. Because whenever he says, well, you're evil in Iran and you're beating women day and night on the streets and you're gunning them down or you're doing this or that, I say, well, why don't you just come and look for yourself? And when you refuse, I mean, I'm not saying that if someone doesn't travel to a place, they can't comment about it. You can. I mean,
excuse with Israel, right?
But when, sorry?
Often, which is often the defense of Israel. You don't live there. You don't know what it's like.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
But for someone who refuses
right.
to travel to a country and says, no, I don't want to see it, then he's already lost the argument. But point is that he tries to narrow down the argument to the way in which women dress in Iran, or the dress codes that are in the public sphere. And it's very interesting that in the early, like in the 19th century, if you look at many of the texts, one of the reasons used to state that Westerners, to claim that Westerners were more civilized than people outside of the West, was they said that women dressed more conservatively, and that these Latin American, many people and women in different parts of the world were they wore less clothes. So a sign of being civilized was the way in which it dressed. But when it changes and the West, they dress less, they're still more civilized. It's still a sign of being more civilized. Or for example, in the 19th century also, one of the claims made about Muslims, especially in like Ottomans in the Ottoman Empire, was that they were homosexuals, and that was a sign of their backwardness. And of course, that wasn't a Western characteristic. But then, when in the West the mood changes or the narrative changes about homosexuality, then the non-Western world is still not civilized because they're not accepting of homosexuality in the way in which the West is. In other words, the values change. Sometimes they're reversed, or they change 180 degrees, or 360 degrees, as some European leaders are saying nowadays. But they change 180 degrees, but the hierarchy remains in place. In other words, if I say, Katie, you're my inferior, today I say you're my inferior because I'm A and you're B. But tomorrow, if I'm B, you're still inferior because I'm B and you're A.
Right. Yeah. It's like I'm inferior because I don't know, my hair is too long today, and then tomorrow I'll be inferior because my hair's too short.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
I want to show another clip because, again, I think this is a really important lesson in both in kind of the history and the contemporary society of Iran, I think it just exposes the reality. But also it's important because I think it shows people how to react to the news media, but also how to, I mean, for people who go on the media, but also how to unpack certain media tropes. So we're going to take a look at this interaction that you had on Sky News. So let me just share that. 1 second, please. No. Okay, where is this? Okay, here we go. Okay, let me add. Okay, it's added, right? Okay. Let me know if you guys can hear it.
Us here on the program. Did Iran majorly miscalculate? Because even now, President Trump is providing Iran with an off-ramp, telling them to come to the negotiating table. At what point will Iran take that offer?
Well, according to your narrative, Iran always miscalculates. It's a regime. I heard the regime 20 times in the last 10 minutes as I was listening. You sound like TASS news agency upgraded during the Soviet Union. And you say the regime is unpopular and is killing its people. When General Soleimani was murdered by the same Trump that you talk about, millions of people came to the streets of this city, Tehran, that I'm in. So how is it that he's so unpopular? This propaganda that you're producing is only justifying aggression. What the Israeli regime did was aggression. What it did was unjustified aggression. And Netanyahu has been saying for over 30 years, some say up to 40 years, he's been saying that Iran's on the verge of creating a nuclear weapon. And thanks to people like you, he gets away with these lies. But people can go online and check how many times he said.
Professor Marandi, if you could just focus on, I know your narrative and I know the line you take, and we've spoken a number of times, and I'm sure, but if you could just focus on answering the question, in terms of the nuclear talks, on day 60, you know, as far as we know, Donald Trump had said Iran has 60 days. Israel attacked on the 61st day. Can we talk a little bit about the regime's competence levels, the intelligence and security, you know, the competence of your intelligence and security agencies, the fact that Mossad was able to build drone sites in your country, the fact that the leadership was asleep in their beds when they were struck and that you ignored these warnings. Can we talk a little bit about the fact that the regime was taken completely by surprise and top leaders have now been decapitated and killed as a result of the Israeli attack?
Saying regime, I think it helps you contain your contempt for independent countries. You after all, you work for Sky News. It's understandable. But the regime, how do you know that the Israeli regime had bases inside Iran? You're just repeating their propaganda. Of course, Israel for you is not a regime. Sorry, it's a state. But it's a genocidal state carrying out extermination in Gaza. But that's not really important. How do you know that they have bases inside Iran?
So are you denying that the top commanders have been killed? Are you denying that top commanders were killed?
Oh, so you mean what you're referring to basically is an attack, an act of aggression, that they suddenly fire missiles at civilian targets at apartment buildings and slaughter people in those apartment buildings, slaughtering whole families. For you, that's targeting. That's a really sophisticated act.
But if I can just ask, have military facilities been hit? Have nuclear facilities been hit?
One of the buildings that had some of these commanders, one or two of these commanders, was a large apartment building where they killed everyone, 60 people, 20 children. That's not important for people like you, but that's important for people like us. For you, people like you who support ethno-supremacism and the chosen people being able to slaughter and exterminate Palestinians.
Professor Marandi, I'm just trying to get the perspective. We're trying to give you airtime so that you can give us the Iranian perspective on this. And we want to know, and I want to understand, Iran's position here. Will you come to the negotiating table now? Donald Trump, after these series of airstrikes and this attack was launched, called on Iran to come back to the negotiating table. As the spokesperson of the regime, or you know, as someone who worked closely with the negotiating team, do you believe they will come to the negotiating table now?
I just want to, we're going to keep playing this, but it's just so interesting that the professor keeps pointing out how charged the term regime is and what double standards there are. And she responds by continuing to use that term.
Well, your regime should know, and your news agency or your TV channel should know better. We were at the negotiating table. It was Trump that conspired with Netanyahu to attack Iran. This is how you twist the truth. You shouldn't invite me because you're easily exposed. Iran was negotiating. Initially, Trump had one position, and so did Witkoff. And then they flipped and said no enrichment. And then they continued the negotiations. And the night before the attack, Trump said that we don't want war. And then after the attack, he said, we're all for it. And you're saying Iran What, is Iran going to come back to the negotiating table? The audacity. Come on, be a bit, show
Okay.
at least a bit of integrity. A bit of integrity will help.
Okay. Okay, Professor Marandi, thanks again for joining us here on the program.
Okay, so another masterclass again. This is something we saw a lot with the reporting, quote unquote, reporting on the negotiations with Hamas. So you had Israel lie, say that they were doing something, sabotage the negotiations, and then pretend that it was Hamas doing that. Like, I feel like we're at this stage where it's not just lies, but it's actually an inversion. One example of this is the rape narrative. The Hamas mass rape. Well, actually, no, there's documented footage of Israeli soldiers raping Palestinians. So it's not just that there's an exaggeration on one side. It's that the thing that they're, what accusation in the mirror, right? That classic trope. Every accusation is a
Right.
confession. And similarly, we see here, they're making the Iranian quote unquote regime, right, which they call it. So the Iranian government is this irrational, fickle, fundamentalist, warmongering, genocidal, basically, or bloodthirsty, right, government. And Trump is the rational guy just trying to negotiate. Can you just correct the record on this, please, and talk about what did happen with these negotiations?
Well, if you notice, she was basically saying Trump gave you 60 days. It's like me saying, Katie, I'm giving you 60 days to hand over the keys to your home,
Right,
and get out. And after 60 days, if I come with with a baseball bat, then I say, well, I gave you 60 days.
right.
And
And
then
you're the adult in the room.
the journalist can say, well, you gave you 60 days. Why didn't you come to the negotiating
Right.
table? That's the logic that she's using. So he was not, gracious about giving us 60 days, but the point is, who is he to give us 60 days in the first place? And we're at the negotiating table. We've been negotiating with the Americans for decades. We've been negotiating over the nuclear program for decades, and we were negotiating with Biden. We were negotiating under Trump with Whitcomb, and then suddenly one night they carry out an assault and it begins slaughtering people across the country. And she, says, yes, you're the competence of your regime. So what are they supposed to do? Are we supposed to, are military commanders supposed to live separate from their families forever because there's always a chance that the Israelis or the Americans are going to attack the country? I mean, it's clear that this narrative that she uses, and people like her, and this, by the way, I think is why Piers Morgan was attacking me, because I think he saw this interview and he wanted revenge for
Right.
that interview. But this narrative is basically to prepare the grounds for an assault on Iran. I'm not saying a particular journalist is responsible, but this is how the media apparatus works. And you see it, they're all paving the way for war. And there's no major difference between liberal media and let's say Fox News. It's the way in which they do it. So
Right.
CNN may not like Trump, they may use a different language, but they're still going to say, well, the Iranians are trying to make a nuclear weapon. That is the given. So the assumption, so if you say, no, Iran is not making nuclear weapons, they say, this person's crazy. But the evidence is there. And when you explain the evidence to them, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. They'll hear it, but it won't change anything. They'll just go on to the next question. And then after you're gone, in the next news cycle, they're going to say the same thing over and over and over again. And their panel discussion, except for when on a rare occasion when they have someone like me, they're all people saying the same thing. One says, let's bomb them. One says, let's sanction them. One says, let's not bomb them or sanction them. But of course, they are backward and they're extremists and they're irrational, but we have to think of a different way to deal with them. So the debate is about an inferior people or inferior regime. And the regime itself is used for a reason.
Right.
You'll never hear them say the Brazilian regime. You'll never hear them say the Saudi regime. They won't say the Jordanian regime, but they'll say the Iranian regime, the Venezuelan regime, the Cuban regime, and that sort of thing.
Right.
Why? Because it's supposed to create an image in the mind of the audience that there's something terribly wrong. And so if we go to war with them, or if we strangle them, there's something wrong with them. So
Right.
even in war, you know, the Iraq war, I despise Saddam Hussein, obviously. He was a monster. But when the United States wanted to wage war against Iraq, I was a part of the anti-war movement in the UK. I was a PhD student there. I had a scholarship. I gave an exam in Iran. I won a scholarship, went there for 3 years, did my PhD. During that time, I joined the anti-war movement and the anti-war coalition. And I think I was actually at the first anti-war demonstration. It was over Afghanistan when Prime Minister at that time, he came to Birmingham to open the Institute for European Studies. And there were like 50, 60, 70 of us protesting against Blair, war, I mean. And then I participated in the anti-war movement, not because I liked Saddam Hussein, because the United States has no legitimate right to invade Iraq. Who is the United States to invade Iraq? In fact, they created Saddam Hussein. The West gave him chemical weapons in the first place. He was fine using them against his own people or against Iranians, but then suddenly when he takes Kuwait, he becomes a monster to them.
Right. And we gave
So
him the
for
green
me,
light first also. They gave him the green light.
oh yes, the
Yeah.
ambassador,
Right.
the U.S. ambassador gave him a green light,
April
and
last
the rest is, I think your viewers would know that they strangled Iraq for years with sanctions, and they ultimately overthrew the country and destroyed so much of it. So I was protesting not because I was a fan of Saddam Hussein, but because I was like others saying, you have no right, you have no moral right to invade the country. But the
Right.
term regime is used so that you delegitimize it. And then what happens later on when the Americans see that the war in Iraq has not worked well for them? You hear that they say, yes, Iraq was a mistake.
Exactly. Right.
They don't say Iraq was a crime. They don't say that we are, as sinister as Saddam Hussein and that we destroyed the country. They'll never say that. They'll say, yeah, that was a mistake.
Right.
It's like
It's
spilled milk.
right. Kind of like it's a similar take often on Vietnam.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agent Orange and
Right.
the millions killed and maimed. It was a mistake.
Yeah. It's ineptitude. It's not
A waste of resources.
sinister. Right.
An
Exactly.
unnecessary war.
Yeah, an unnecessary war, spilled a lot of blood and treasure, all those framings. Yeah. By the way, guys, it's great that we have so many viewers because it makes sense because this is such a great guest. But let's get those likes up there because I know, as I say on Useful Idiots, I know not more than half of you are hate watching. So we're at almost 7,000. I want to see 3,500 likes. I'll give you a couple minutes to get up to that level. Okay. Wanted to also
And if
ask
they don't like it, you're going to expel
Pull the
me from the
plug.
discussion.
Yeah, pull the plug. Yeah. No, of course I won't do that. But I actually have a question for you about appearance that you made during an interview with Glenn Deason. It was earlier today, I believe. And you said that for Iran, quote, Israel is a slideshow. The threat is the United States. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, the Israeli regime is not a strong regime. It's weak. They without full support from the collective West,
Right.
they cannot even continue the genocide in Gaza. So it is a regime that is fully dependent. Doesn't weapons come from the West, its ammunition comes from the West, aid comes from the West, political cover comes from the West, and so on. And the U.S. would even give it special privileges that it would not give to anyone else. So a lot, I think I'm sure you know this, but over the years, lot of the technology that the United States wouldn't allow to be exported to China would be exported through Israel to China. So they have, special rights and privileges that even Americans didn't have. That's how much support they. And through this, they tried to create a lobby in China, and of course, become influential there as well. And which, by the way, they've lost. They're deeply despised now in China, as they are in Russia. But as we see right now, despite the fact that Iran was caught off guard, right now the Israelis are not winning this war. If they were winning the war, Trump wouldn't be moving towards entering the war. If the Israelis were winning, why should Trump go after something so controversial where overwhelmingly the majority of Americans are opposed to? It's because things are not going well. But they are trying to hide it. They're not showing the devastation in Israel, and they're exaggerating what's happening in Iran. So, real threat to Iran is the United States. It always has been. And the Iranians have been preparing themselves for war with the United States for well over 2 decades. And I would argue that after invasion of Iraq, this became a key issue for Iran. And so they began to develop a doctrine to defend the country against U.S. aggression. And that is why they, for example, among other things, they built so many underground missile and drone bases, which have nothing to do with Israel. The missiles and drones that are being fired at the Israeli regime are long-range missiles and long-range drones, but the main defense that Iran has is directed towards the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean and U.S. assets across the region. That is what Iran has been preparing itself for a very long period of time. And Iran is much more capable as a result to deal with the United States because it has countless underground missile and drone bases. And you don't need these more expensive long-range missiles and drones. Short-range, medium-range missiles and drones can easily cross the Persian Gulf in a very short period of time and destroy their targets. Of course, I should add that in general, Iranian missiles and drones are much less expensive than what the Americans and the Israelis do. So when Iran fires a missile, the Israelis are spending 20 times more money than the Iranians just to try to down it. If they succeed, they lose, and if they fail, the missile hits and they lose too. But in the Persian Gulf region, if anyone looks at the map, Iran owns one side of the Persian Gulf. That's why it's called the Persian Gulf. And it's not very wide, and it's full of oil and gas installations. So these tiny Arab family dictatorships on the other side of the Persian Gulf that host American bases, Iranians would consider them as complicit in any aggression. They're hosting any bases. So if there's war, some people say, well, the Iranians can close the Strait of Hormuz. It's far worse than that, because the Iranians can close the Strait of Hormuz. They can sink oil and gas, tankers, and ships that carry gas, and they can also destroy the installations. And so even if they don't have to close the Strait of Hormuz, any one of these which has destroyed the whole, the whole export of oil and gas comes to an end. And it's not just the Persian Gulf region. The Americans are very vulnerable in Iraq and elsewhere. So a war between Iran and the United States would, of course, be horrific. And Iran doesn't want it. No one should want it. But it's not a war that the Americans would win. The Americans would definitely lose. It will bring down the global economy. Because without energy, everything shuts down. And then imagine if countries across the world, businesses across the world, they collapse. And imagine the number of people that'll be on the move across the world, the instability that will be brought about in different countries. And then Trump, who is not extremely popular right now, but also now that we see his base is divided over the war. If we have an energy crisis, I think that he will be in very, very serious trouble. I don't think he will be able to end his term. And I think he'll either be removed or at some point he'd have to step down.
Yeah. You were involved, right, in the negotiating team. Is that correct? I want to make sure that I get your role correct.
In 2015, Dr. Zarif, who was the foreign minister, he asked me to be on the negotiating team. And I didn't want to because I'm not a negotiator. I didn't have any experience and I wasn't part of this process before. So I refused. Then he asked me to be the spokesman for the team. And again, I refused because I said, if I become a spokesman, I can only say a few words because a spokesperson can only speak within a particular framework.
Right.
And I'm not saying anyone can do it. You have to be a smart person, very careful about what you say. But I said to him, I feel that if I can just talk to people, then I would be more effective. So I proposed that I be his a media advisor to the team. And that meant, and I said to him, I will say things, and you can, if you find it to be problematic, just say he's speaking for himself. He's not he's not my spokesman, and we reject what he says. That never came about. He never did such a thing. But the point was that it gave me room for maneuver to talk to journalists, to talk to debates about Iran's position without being boxed in due to, a certain official position that I would have.
Right.
Then later on, when Dr. Bagheri, 4 years ago, when he was negotiating, the file was in his hand. He asked me to play the same role. He asked me what I did with Dr. Zarif. I explained, and he said, "Can you do the same with me?" So I went with him to Vienna, just so I could work with Dr. Zarif, and I was the media advisor. So I just spoke with him, but I was not, I didn't have any official capacity. As I don't now, I don't work for anyone. I work for my university, but when I tweet things or when I say things, I'm speaking on my own behalf. The government may agree with it, they may not agree with it. If I'm wrong, it's my responsibility.
Did you learn anything in those capacities that surprised you?
I'd better be careful about some of the things I say, but
Okay. Well, no, I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position, so you don't have to.
I've always been skeptical. No, it's okay. I'll just be careful. I've always been very skeptical about the United States. And the reason is that any country that sees itself as exceptional, and Europeans have also seen that they've seen themselves as exceptional. Eurocentrism and exceptionalism. Again, trying to civilize the rest of the world and the free world, the civilized world versus other. But the United States, as a country that sees itself as exceptional, believes that it has certain extra rights and privileges. It's like you being like you and let's say you have a child. You have exceptional rights. Your child has to obey you, but you don't have to obey your child.
Yeah.
So if you have an agreement with your child, you can break your promise and nothing is going to happen, but you can argue that there are more important reasons why I broke my promise. There's a reason why I had to break my promise.
Sure.
But your child cannot do that. Your child has to obey you. So the problem with the United States is that since it sees itself as exceptional, in agreements, it can violate them, but the other side can't. And the media will not attack the United States for violating its agreements. It will attack the other side. So this lady, for example, in Sky News, she says that Trump offered Iran an off-ramp. What does she mean? For Iran to give up its sovereignty. So Trump tore up a nuclear deal. Then he and Netanyahu attacked Iran, murdered people after giving Iran 60 days, like, an offer it can't refuse. You've heard that before. And then instead of saying, well, that's horrible, she says he offered you an offer. So even though he violated the deal, he is threatening you. He attacks you, you're the problem.
Right.
Because he is American. He's exceptional. He's the mature actor, even if you hate him within the context of American politics, but still, Iran, they're the mullahs, they're the crazy people, they're the terrorists, they are destroying the region, they're evil, they kill women, they butcher people and all that sort of thing. So everything is justified. So at the end of the day, that's why it sounds very logical for her to say President Trump gave you an off-ramp.
Yeah. Do you think, by the way, that speaking of President Trump, why is he? I know this is a kind of basic question, but why is he supporting Netanyahu? What is it he wants to get out of this? And more generally, what does the West get from its unwavering support of Israel? There's that whole debate, like the wag the dog debate. Does Israel control the U.S. or does the U.S. control Israel? Does Israel use the U.S. or does the U.S. Use Israel? So can you answer that larger question and also in this specific case, what's happening? If you're watching this live, you're in luck. You got to see that whole almost 2-hour discussion with Dr. Marandi. If you're watching this later to see the whole discussion, go to patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Okay, so now we are going to bring on our second guest. You know him from Jadaliyah. Welcome to the show. Welcome back, Mouin Rabbani.
Hi, Katie. It's very good to be
Hi.
with you again.
Thank you, of course. Now, you are so knowledgeable about so many things, and I could ask you about so many things, but I actually want to
There's
start
even
off.
more things I know nothing about.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we'll have to do a show on that. But I wanted to ask you about, as the world is looking at what's happening in Iran, I think it's very important that we remain focused on what is happening in not just Gaza, but Palestine. So can you tell us some of the things that we need to be cognizant of as we justifiably turn our attention towards Iran as well?
Yes. Well, I don't think an effort to divert attention from the genocide in Gaza was a priority for Israel in taking its decision to launch its war against Iran, for the simple reason that it was not lacking in support, in impunity, in assistance, and in diplomatic and political cover from its Western sponsors and allies for almost 2 years of genocide. So there really wasn't an important need for that. But having said that, the world's focus on the on the already horrific and potentially genuinely catastrophic consequences of the new war that Israel has unleashed, of course, makes it much easier for Israel not only to continue what it's doing, but to do even more. So now, for example, massacres at these kill zones masquerading as aid distribution sites run by this crazy outfit known as GHF, designed for the US and Israeli governments by the Boston Consulting Group, have become a daily occurrence. Every single day, people, often dozens, are massacred at these kill zones, desperate people trying to secure basic supplies to feed their families. I think it was yesterday or perhaps the day before that Israel actually fired tank shells and killed 51 people at one of these kill zones masquerading as a aid distribution center. The difference is that this time Israel didn't pretend it didn't happen, didn't try to blame Hamas. It almost openly acknowledged it. And we're seeing daily bombings, of course, of residential homes and all the rest of it in the Gaza Strip. We're seeing the continued Israeli military campaign and pogroms in the West Bank. And the other risk is that if the United States becomes a direct participant in offensive military operations against Iran, it is, of course, already deeply involved in the Israeli campaign. But if it, becomes directly involved in bombing Iran, and if that in turn unleashes a regional firestorm, a regional conflict with potentially global consequences, global economic consequences, and all the rest of it, then we're really at a stage where things have reached a level where Israel may well feel emboldened to pursue the mass expulsion of Palestinians, not only from the Gaza Strip, but also the West Bank, and potentially even Palestinian citizens of Israel. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but it becomes a much more plausible and increasingly likely scenario that under cover of such a catastrophe, Israel will simply do as it pleases. And of course, there's a precedent for Israel seeking to take advantage of international crises to conduct policies. And in fact, in 1989, during the Tiananmen protests and then the Chinese government's crackdown on them, none other than the current Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu at the time, proposed that Israel should take advantage of the international focus on China to seek to expel Palestinians from the occupied territories and solve what was then the first intifada at its height for once and for all.
And how does what Israel is doing in Iran fit into the plan that what it's doing? Sorry, let me rephrase this. How does what Israel is doing in Iran fit into what they're doing in Palestine? Like, what is this part of? What greater project is this part of? Are both of these things part of?
Well, the greater project is Israel's ambition to fundamentally reshape the strategic environment of the Middle East generation, of the Middle East region for a generation to come. As you may recall, on October 7th, 2023, in the wake of the Hamas attacks of that day, Israel was in complete disarray. Its military and intelligence simply collapsed. It was incapable of coherently responding to these attacks. And so that same evening, it launched a campaign of violent and vicious revenge that appeared to be primarily motivated by bloodlust, by revenge, rather than any coherent strategy. That was the origins of Israel's ongoing genocidal campaign in the Gaza Strip. Then in the course of last summer, things began to change. Israel appears to have regained its confidence and went on the offensive. We saw this most clearly in Lebanon, where it launched the very successful decapitation strike against Hezbollah that took out almost the entire leadership of the movement, and then invaded Lebanon and bombed Lebanon intensively for more than a month. And that led then to a transformation of Lebanon's domestic political order with new arrangements that were much more amenable to Israeli and U.S. interests. Hezbollah was far from destroyed, but it was indeed significantly weakened. Then in December, the Assad regime in Syria was ousted. I don't think that it is Israel that was primarily responsible for this development. I do think it played a contributory role, but I don't think this was primarily a result of Israeli policy or Israeli initiative. But nevertheless, I think we have to understand that from Israel's perspective, it was facing this coalition that's known as the axis of resistance. And Israel portrays it as an octopus where Iran is the head and all these other states and movements, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Palestine, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, various, the former Assad regime in Syria, various pro-Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria, are the tentacles of that octopus. I think it's a very simplistic and ultimately false characterization of this coalition and its relations with each other. But nevertheless, from Israel's perspective, it worked throughout the second half of 2024 to, let's say, dismantle the individual tentacles of the octopus. And now it's going after the head, to crush the head of the octopus. That's why Israel has been so consistently talking about regime change in Iran, or at least it's one key reason why it's consistently talking about regime change in Iran. And Israel is convinced that if it can decisively knock Iran out of the strategic equation of the Middle East, then it will have subordinated the entire region to its will. And it's a very similar theory to that which we were often confronted with during the Cold War. There would be a local conflict somewhere in Africa or Latin America or anywhere else, and we were led to believe that this was ultimately because of Soviet agitation and Soviet incitement and Soviet arms and so on. And if only we could remove the Soviet Union from the equation, then this conflict would be resolved, because these were people that didn't really have an understanding of why they were fighting. These are not people that were aware of any grievances they might have, but rather ideas were being injected into their brains by the nefarious communists in Moscow. And that's why we had this conflict. Well, it's very similar now. Oh, and I should add, one of the main arenas where we used to hear this theory was in the Middle East, where the Palestinians were basically agents of the Soviet Union. Now there's a popular theory that Palestinians didn't exist until Yasser Arafat, who was supposedly a KGB agent, invented the word in 1964. People are actually saying this with the utmost conviction. But the Soviet Union disappeared. Didn't stop the Second Intifada. It didn't stop October 7th. So here we are. But now, the only reason Israel is facing opposition and resistance from Palestinians, of course, is because of Iran. And if you remove Iran, Saudi Arabia and other states will normalize relations with Israel, and Israel will be able to normalize relations with all these states without paying any heed to Palestinian rights, self-determination, or anything else. And the Palestinians will be ultimately, finally, decisively isolated, marginalized, defeated, and will disappear into the mists of time. So the idea is that if you can decisively knock Iran out of the strategic equation of the Middle East, you dominate the entire region. It's a very false assumption, of course, based on wishful thinking, but that's kind of the motivation behind much of what we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, wishful thinking indeed, and also very explicit in some cases. So I actually want to play a clip that I know that you tweeted about. Let's just see. Where is this? Sorry, I have too many things open. It's a clip of Netanyahu. 1 second. So we are this is we were very happy to stream. Okay, here we go. So apologies for the tech delays. This was the first time we did something on Zoom. So, okay, let's see. All right, here we go. All right, so here's Netanyahu. So trigger warning to everyone. Okay.
Freedom is never cheap. It's never free. Freedom requires these subjugated people to rise up, and it's up to them. Freedom is never cheap. It's never free.
Okay.
Freedom requires.
That's very moving.
Well,
very encouraging. Yeah.
He should know Palestinians have been sacrificing for their freedom for an entire century now, and then some.
Right. Yeah. And with a lot more bravery than we've seen from the IDF, by the way.
Well, I think that's unfair. If you listen to the rest of Netanyahu's comments, his son was forced to postpone his wedding as a result of the war with Iran. So when you want to talk about an extraordinary level of human suffering, I think no one has anything on that.
You're right. In fact, we should have a moment of silence for his fail son, who spends most of his time in Miami, and I guess now is going to have a delayed wedding. Well, I also wanted to ask you about this report or this reporting that's coming from Seymour Hersh that a lot of people are curious about. Cy Hersh. He writes, a major U.S. bombing campaign against Iran is expected to begin as early as this weekend, according to my trusted Israeli and American sources. Approved by the Trump administration, the strikes will focus on key military and nuclear infrastructure, including the fortified Fordo facility where Iran's most advanced centrifuges are located deep underground. Have you seen this, and do you have any thoughts about this?
I have. The problem with any statements coming out of this administration is that you take them seriously at your peril,
right,
and you ignore them at your peril. Trump will say anything and everything, and it may have predictive value, or it may just be kind of hot air, but you won't know until it's too late often. It's unclear what Trump's plans are, because he has said so many and such contradictory things over the past few days. My gut instinct is that the direction of travel is towards an inevitable U.S. attack on Iran, or rather, because the U.S. is already deeply involved, direct U.S. participation in the bombing of Iranian territory. But having said that, at the same time, Trump is facing genuine opposition within his core constituency, the MAGA cult. You've heard statements from Trump where he's been exuberantly praising the success of Israel's military campaign against Iran. And you have to wonder, is that setting the stage for American participation? Because Trump has been persuaded it really will take no more than one massive bombing run against Fordo to quote unquote finish the job? Or is this a signal from Trump basically saying the Israelis are doing so well, they don't need us anymore, and therefore they're on their own? It's almost, if you're asking me to get a sense of where the U.S. is heading based on statements by Trump, my answer would be that is something that is virtually impossible, because he has made statements that would substantiate virtually any and every scenario over the coming days and weeks. My sense is that the direction of travel is towards direct participation. There do seem to be significant efforts made to hold him back, but we're also dealing with an extraordinary narcissist who's going to be very susceptible to accusations that he's looking weak, especially when you've got the Democratic leadership in Congress, rather than seeking to restrain him, mocking him for not being extreme enough
Like
with
Chuck
respect
Schumer.
to Iran. Yeah, exactly.
So disgusting. Yeah, that stupid ad, Taco Trump.
Yeah. You know, what I was reading a
The
report
video, I mean.
yesterday. Yes, I think it was in the Washington Post. I'm not sure that Trump is seeking assurances that these massive bunker busters that only the United States has would actually be able to demolish the Fordo nuclear reactor. Perhaps an important reason for his doubts are that these bombs are built by Boeing, and he has questions about whether they're more reliable than the other products they've been making that have recently been falling out of the sky. And secondly, you know, this has been sold to Trump as once and done, you know, one and done. You do a massive bombing raid, Iran's nuclear program will evaporate into thin air. The Iranian people will rise up as one against the Islamic Republican regime, and 24 hours later, Pahlavi rule will be restored in Tehran, and Iran really will be the cakewalk that had been predicted in Iraq. And it seems that Trump is not yet entirely convinced that that is indeed the case, which of course it won't be. We also don't know to what extent conservative Gulf states, who, despite their distaste for Iran and its rulers, are probably petrified at the prospect of a general regional war. To what extent are they behind the scenes trying to use their influence in Washington to seek to restrain Trump? And of course, you know, what amounts to a civil war within the MAGA cult about this. So there are forces, I think, that are working to restrain Trump. But unfortunately, I do feel that the direction of travel is towards escalation.
Yeah, because I remember the last time I think I had you on, actually, I had you on with Trita Parsi, and I was a little overly optimistic that maybe Trump was finally shifting things and gonna realign maybe and no longer be such a I don't want to curse, but so solicitous of Israel, but that was not the case.
Well, look, you have to believe one of two things. Either Trump came into office determined to have a military conflict with Iran. He either was determined to attack Iran from the very outset, and this whole diplomacy, negotiations, and so on was really no more than a feint to lull Tehran into a false sense of security in order to be able to more effectively attack it. Or you have to believe that Trump was initially serious about peaceful resolution, a negotiated resolution of the relationship with Iran, but that at some point was persuaded to go in a different direction. From the evidence I've seen, I lean towards the second interpretation. My sense of it is that, in contrast to his first term, Trump came into office. He recognized the absolute abject failure of his policy of maximum pressure during his first term, which led to Iran enriching uranium to increasingly high levels. It had become a nuclear threshold state, which essentially means that Iran is now a political decision rather than a significant technological development away from possessing a nuclear war and joining Israel in the nuclear club, which is something that's almost never discussed. And that he feared that at that moment he would have no choice but to enter into armed conflict with Iran, as someone who sought to present himself as kind of an icon of non-interventionism, as a polar opposite of the forever war. He then pursued an opening with Iran, which Iran accepted. And the Iranians themselves have indicated that they believed these negotiations were serious and were making progress. And you have to give an awful lot of credit to Trump and Witkoff, who were, not the brightest bulbs in the box, who don't really know the Middle East well, unless you're talking about real estate, who have very little knowledge of Iran and not much knowledge of the Iranian nuclear file. You would have to give them a lot more credit than they deserve to believe that this was all some kind of sophisticated ruse. And what happened, of course, is that initially in the negotiations, the US put forward a very clear red line that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, and it needs absolute watertight guarantees that that would never happen. Iran, for its part, accepted the US red line and had a red line of its own, that Iran would not renounce any of the rights that it enjoys under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which, unlike Israel, Iran has ratified, that it would not renounce any of the rights under that treaty to have a civilian nuclear program on its own territory, including the enrichment of uranium on Iranian territory to very low levels for exclusively civilian purposes. And as we discussed last time with Trita Parsi, there seemed to be room for agreement between these two red lines. What then appears to have happened is that Israel, working closely together with the hawks within the Trump administration, with the neocons, with the Israel loyalists, appear to have persuaded Trump and Witkoff that ending any enrichment of uranium on Iranian soil was a viable negotiating position, and that Iran was in such desperate economic straits that it could be compelled to accept this US demand. First they tried what they called the Libya model, and Trump recognized that that was a transparent attempt to sabotage the negotiations and rejected it. So now they came with this idea of no enrichment. And this time, Trump took the bait. And when that was put forward in negotiations, Iranians, of course, rejected it. And this coalition then went back to Trump and Witkoff and said, we have an even better idea, a short, sharp, highly successful decapitation strike against Iran's military and security leadership that will basically cause such chaos and disarray in the Iranian leadership's ranks. Look what we managed to do to Hezbollah last year. Iran will be on its knees. It will have no choice but to capitulate to any negotiating demands that the US then makes. So I personally, I believe that it was sold to Trump in order to make it more attractive to him as an initiative to improve his negotiating position and to give him leverage to be able to dictate whatever the US wants to Iran, rather than as the opening salvo of a regional war. And again, Trump took the bait and fell for it. And now we're in the third stage, where if you look at what Israel and its apologists are constantly trumpeting in the media, we're only one massive bombing raid away from total victory. If Trump would only authorize the B-2s to drop these massive bombs on Fordow, it will be over in the space of a few minutes. Not only will Iran capitulate, the regime will disintegrate, the population will rise up, and problem solved.
Yeah, it's very disturbing. And I think it's worth noting, by the way, especially for our younger viewers out there, that as Professor Marandi, no, it was you who just pointed out. Was it you or Dr. Marandi who pointed out the first time that Netanyahu said that Iran was close to having nuclear weapons?
That was him.
Okay, that was him. So,
me.
Well, I want to make sure that people take his claims with a grain of salt. I mean, honestly, probably this audience does already do that, but I think it's this actually surprisingly was done by CNN, which was kind of shocking because CNN doesn't do a lot of whatever the opposite of saber rattling is. It doesn't engage in a lot of olive branching. So let's take a look at this clip of Netanyahu making some familiar claims. Just make sure the volume is up. Wait 1 second, I muted it. Sorry about that.
I
Okay.
have this clip also, Katie, if you
Oh,
need it.
okay. I got it. Do you want me to play it or?
Sure.
Okay.
The deadline for attaining this goal is getting extremely close.
Right.
Iran, by the way, is also outpacing Iraq in the development of ballistic missile systems that they hope will reach the eastern seaboard of the United States within 15 years. By next spring, at most, by next summer, at current enrichment rates, they will have finished the medium enrichment and move on to the final stage. From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks, before they get enough enriched uranium for the first bomb. The foremost sponsor of global terrorism could be weeks away from having enough enriched uranium for an entire arsenal of nuclear weapons. That would place a militant Islamic terror regime weeks away from having the fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year.
So yeah, if any of this sounds familiar, it's because it is.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of the run up to the Iraq War.
Yeah.
Could be, might, would be able to, all these kind of hedges, so that later when these words are played back to you, oh, I never said it was certain. I said it was very likely, it was plausible, and so on. But look, the thing to understand about this clip, I've compared Israel inciting against or campaigning against nuclear proliferation in the Middle East to a drunken sailor slurring his way through a sermon against sobriety, and then immediately once he's done, going to the bar, demanding a drink, and being given a free bottle by the American bartender and being told it's on the house because we were so impressed by your oratory. It's absolutely absurd when you consider Israel has a nuclear arsenal of several hundred nuclear weapons and delivery systems to match. Iran does not. Iran has signed and ratified the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel has not. Iran's nuclear facilities are under the supervision of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Israel's are not. Iran in 2015 agreed to the most intrusive inspection, monitoring, and verification system in the history of the nuclear age. There are no inspections of Israeli nuclear facilities. So the idea that somehow Israel is a legitimate partner in seeking non-proliferation, nuclear non-proliferation in the Middle East is absurd beyond words. And more broadly, there are really only two ways to deal with this issue. Either the Middle East is transformed into a nuclear-free region where no state possesses nuclear weapons, and for that matter, any other weapons of mass destruction, or Israel maintains its nuclear monopoly, in which case it will be repeatedly challenged until that challenge ultimately succeeds. And until it succeeds, we will see Israel launching increasingly devastating, as in this case, unprovoked wars of aggression against states that are seeking to challenge its nuclear monopoly. Because from Israel's perspective, as was demonstrated by its attack on Iraq's nuclear reactor in 1981 and in Syria in 2007, it is not about preventing, or not only about preventing any other state in the region from possessing a nuclear weapon. It is ensuring that no other state in the region has the technological capacity to develop a nuclear weapon.
Right. And as you pointed out, I mean, no one, it's kind of it's like the open secret of Israel that they have this nuclear arsenal.
Try to get any Western government to tell you that Israel has a nuclear weapon.
Right.
Seriously,
Nuclear
no
weapons,
one will tell you. They will. You ask them, does Israel have a nuclear weapon? And you'll get two answers. Iran must be prevented from acquiring nuclear weapons, and Israel has a right to self-defense. That will be their answer when they're asked about whether Israel has it. It's it's kind of the dirty little secret of the Western club, and everyone knows it. And behind closed doors, people talk about it openly, but no one will admit it in public, because you can't acknowledge that a state that has refused to sign the NPT, that refuses inspections, has a nuclear arsenal, and still pretend that there should be no consequences attached. But that was in the old days, if I can use that term. In the world that has been created by Israel and its Western sponsors and allies since October 2023, all these norms and values, the limitations placed on state conduct by international law and the laws of war and so on, these no longer exist. These have been transformed into items for debate and discussion in textbooks, or for archiving in a library.
Well, I'm sorry.
And if I may, just one thing.
Yeah,
and now the final nail in the coffin is that the entire nuclear regulatory regime is being incinerated as well, by describing this unprovoked Israeli war of aggression against Iran and the direct targeting of its nuclear facilities by a nuclear power as a legitimate act of self-defense.
Right. And I'm about to show a video that was on CNN, but first I'm going to read the way it was introduced by Halal Flow. Everyone should follow this account. So Halal Flow tweets, CNN airs an analysis of what it would look like if Iran dropped a nuclear bomb on Israel. And then we're gonna watch that video. But Halal Flow points out, Israel possesses undeclared nuclear weapons and is not a member of the IAEA, unlike Iran, which is a member and, according to a recent IAEA report, has no nuclear weapons. But that doesn't stop CNN from hallucinating about Iran nuclear bombing Israel. So let us take a look at this clip that CNN made.
Amid showers of missiles and thundering exchanges, the claims are growing louder. Israel and its allies insist the already sweeping attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities need to be decisive.
If you want this war to de-escalate, get the nukes out of Tehran's hands. It's very simple, not complicated. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon.
For decades, Iranian leaders have been building a nuclear program which they say is for research and to generate electricity. Indeed, just days ago, Iranian leadership reiterated they have no intention of building a nuke. But intelligence and military analysts say Iran has long been stockpiling refined uranium, developing more powerful missiles, and mining the technical knowledge of allies, including Russia, with hopes of someday becoming the world's 10th nuclear-armed nation.
The Iranians are definitely much closer than they were 5 or 10 years ago, and it is certainly true that they've gotten a lot closer to deploying a weapon of this type than they were even a year or two ago.
How big would an Iranian nuke be? Some analysts suspect it would pack about 2/3 of the explosive power of some bombs developed by the U.S. in the 1940s and 50s. U.S. intelligence predicts a viable weapon could still be years away, but the Israelis argue it might come much quicker.
We decided to act because we saw enough uranium, enriched uranium, for 9 bombs, and all they had to do was weaponize them.
Netanyahu did not offer specific evidence. The Israelis have made such claims before.
Right here.
And the complete equation is more complicated. Any Iranian nuke would have to be miniaturized enough to be carried by a missile, plane, or other delivery mechanism. It would need to evade Israel's robust detection and defense systems, and it would have to work. But if just one made it through,
it could obliterate a large portion of a major city. It could make a port unusable.
It could cripple communications, shut down electricity, and poison the land with radioactive fallout. And so far, plenty of analysts note a lot of Iran's nuclear infrastructure is deep in the ground where Israeli bombs can't reach it.
Right now, Iran, if they were left alone, could reconstitute their program very quickly.
Again, the Iranians say they have no plans to produce a nuclear weapon, even as the Israelis say they just can't take their word on that, can't afford to be wrong about the nuclear aspirations of their old foe, not even once. Tom Foreman, CNN, Washington.
Can I just say, I wasn't unfortunately paying attention closely enough, but when the narrator of that clip said Iran would become the 10th nuclear power and showed a map of the world, I'm curious whether Israel was identified on that map.
Actually, you know what's interesting? So Ryan Grimm tweeted this out and said in this segment, speculating what an Iranian nuclear strike would look like, they briefly show an image of all the world's nuclear states and include Israel on it. Someone's getting a phone call. In fact, let me show, let's just see, where is the, hold on, we have a screenshot of it. Is this, where is it? Wild segment. Oh, here it is. Here's the frame in question. Let me just, am I still sharing that? No. Okay, here we go. So let's see.
Yep, it's there.
There it is. So did CNN just admit?
But is it in pink or in red?
It looks like Iran. Oh, you can't.
It looks like they are all in red except for Iran, which has a question mark, and every other one is confirmed.
Interesting.
Yeah, but Israel
definitely did get a phone call.
It is such bullshit.
What do you mean? It's great. This is they finally showed the truth. It's the opposite of bullshit. Bullshit is when they pretend they don't have it. But any final thoughts on this, Mouin? I mean, there's like so much to unpack there, but we don't have all night. So just give me your couple of,
I think this needs to be recognized as, first and foremost, a war launched by Israel to preserve its monopoly over the possession of nuclear weapons in the Middle East. And this is a monopoly that is not going to exist indefinitely. So either we work towards a nuclear-free Middle East, or we work towards some kind of workable arrangement to deconstruct that monopoly, or we're looking at periodic wars exactly like we're seeing today by Israel to maintain that monopoly. And it's a campaign that will ultimately fail. And it could be failing very soon precisely as a result of this war. Secondly, while as I mentioned earlier, I do not think that diverting attention from the genocide in Gaza was a primary motivation for Israel in launching this war. I think it's very much an added benefit, and it will become an even bigger benefit to Israel if it succeeds in persuading the Trump administration to launch a war of its own against Iran by, bombing Iran and then all the potential regional consequences. And when that hits, I think it's very important to keep very focused on what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, because Israel, particularly with the radical extremist loonies currently running its government, will see this as a golden opportunity. We'll see this as an opportunity that won't come again, and will do everything within its power to take advantage of that opportunity.
Well, thank you so much, Mouin. This has been wonderful as always. And
thank you.
Yeah, of course. And we will see you again, I'm sure. You're always
look
a
forward to it.
welcome guest, and people love your appearances. So thank you,
Thank
Mouin
you.
Rabbani. And everyone should follow him on Twitter and subscribe to the Jadaliya YouTube show.
Thank you.
Have a great night. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much to our guest, to Mouin. Thank you to Professor Marandi. Thank you to Brad for troubleshooting this Zoom thing during the first half. Thank you, Danny Haifong, for helping us with the Zoom. Thank you for all these super chats. Let's see. I'm going to read them really quickly. Let's see. I am. Thanks for having the good Dr. MM on. Very wise man. Reverend Edmund Bolea, if he's Italian, it's Bolela. If it's Spanish name, then it's Bolea. So I forget which it is. Anyway, war with Iran is pathology in ways I can barely express. This will be annihilation on a global scale. If you are in the U.S., contact your representatives and the White House to oppose this madness. God help us all. And he's a reverend. So when he says God help us all, that means something more than it does when I say it. Let's see. We already did that. We read that. Was Trump talking about a nuclear deal or an Amazon product 60-day return policy? Good question. Duly noted, writes Netanyahu has two choices: face prison or continue war and conflict. He's dangerous to U.S. security and the world. He sabotaged the two-state solution, and he sabotaged any peace with Iran, a feral animal backed into a corner. Danny Hafang, everyone should support Katie. Thanks, Danny. New member. Thanks, Usama. My favorite Beatle, okay, is Mohammad Marandi. I read that before. Okay, I will forward this. There's a message about whether or not this Professor Marandi can. Let me take a screenshot of this. Okay. Everyone hit the like button. It's a mitzvah, righteous deed. Hasana, an act of grace. Zachary writes, if Judgment Day is coming, then I wouldn't want to be siding with the kid-killing military. Yes. Duly noted. Says Cruz, Huckabee, Schumer, and the rest of the like, their cheese fell off their cracker. Ted Hazen says, as a follower of Jesus, his Sermon on the Mount, and nonviolent way, I denounce Christian Zionism. It is Antichrist. Thank you, KH and Professor Marandi. Thanks, KH and Dr. Marandi. Stay safe. Okay, Katie, please tell Professor Marandi that his perspective and humanity and wisdom is an inspiration. Thank you, Professor. Also, did you know Trump uses a catheter? Did not know that. This I'll tell the professor. They can absolutely target the phone. A cheap laptop running Linux would be safer for Dr. Marandi. Thank you, Philip Blair, for gifting the Katie Halper Show memberships. Yosef Dalian, not all Americans are blind. As a true descendant of Israel, I can say we are woke to the plot of those coverts and wickedness of our government. Sparky says President Trump can redeem himself with MAGA and much of the world by having the U.S. Navy carrier groups go against Israel rather than Iran. Good luck with that. Firmware says it seems unlikely that Israel's expensive aerial defense can outlast Iran's supply of missiles. This might be why Donald Trump changed his rhetoric so suddenly and dramatically. Super sticker from Zia Partovi. Thank you. Sparky says Javier Milei snuck Argentina's gold reserves to London to give globalist leverage against Argentina. He pretended to be like Trump to get elected. He's parting out Argentina like a corporate raider. Thank you, Dr. Marandi from Firmware. Iran has a right to defend itself. The great Martha Allen says, excellent program. Thank you. No war on Iran. Great to see Professor Marandi, says Sparky. Was the détente between Iran and Saudi Arabia faint? All right, I'll ask that. I'll save that to ask for guests another time. Let's see. Question for Dr. Marandi. Is it possible that, like Russia and China, Iran has handshake agreements with Russia and China rather than written ones? Dola gifted membership. Thank you for that. Oh, Dr. Marandi and Mouin Rabbani, what a cast. Why is Iran helping Russia to kill Ukrainians with drones? Thank you for gifting. Can Israel's aerial defenses outlast Iran's supply of missiles? Might this be why Donald Trump has changed his rhetoric so suddenly dramatically? I think we read that already. Thank you, Dr. Rabbani, for your work and witness. It is a source of insight, clarity, and edification. May your voice be heard and live in history. That is very nice. There is no honor in empire. There is no such thing as a superior or inferior group of people. Amen to that. Well, thank you all so much for joining. Again, as I said, if you're watching this live, you're in luck because this you got to see this whole thing. If you're watching this later, and you want to see the full interview with the great Dr. Marandi, you can find that at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show, and we will see you next week. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Like the stream, sign up for subscribe to the channel, and give it a like. Bye, everyone.
Okay, I'm down. You got members, man. You got members.